Hello, everyone. It's Rycluse, unfortunately, here with something a little bit different. You may notice that this is on a new channel. You're probably familiar with how second channels work. This is going to be for unscripted content, little side stuff, shit posts, and just basically anything that doesn't fit on the curated main channel. And what I'm starting out with today is, if you haven't heard, either through community posts or through Twitter, I am going to be making a Doki Doki Literature Club retrospective soon. And Doki Doki Literature Club is the first game that I ever made a video on. And I have not rewatched this video in its entirety in a very long time. I've rewatched little bits of it, but I've never sat down and watched the whole thing from start to finish. So I thought it might be kind of fun, since the retrospective is partially going to be about sort of righting my wrongs from back then, to sit down and just give a full reaction slash commentary on this original video. Let's get started.
I know there are a lot of people who didn't click on this video because, man, just look at that title.
Oh boy, and we gotta stop already. Uh, First, it really bothers me that I say just so much on recording. I think it's just something that I naturally do, but it's something that you can normally kind of keep down if you're paying a lot of attention. Also, I'm pretty sure I do mention it at the end of this video, but man, this mic quality is really bad. This was recorded on a gaming headset, a Razer Carcarius that was like 6 years old at the time. So I kind of sound like, I've got like a sock over my head when I'm recording this, and maybe the microphone is also inside the sock.
And I know there are many more people whose fingers are hovering over the close button right now, but hear me out.
I promise not to pause every 5 seconds here, but that was a little indicator of the fact that I was terrified that absolutely nobody was going to take this video seriously, because Doki Doki Literature Club, nobody had heard of this game at the time, and I thought that the game's title was so stupid and weebish that like it would be impossible for me to get anybody's attention in talking about it. So this is why the opening 15 seconds of this video are just like, wait, stop, don't click off of the tab, please.
Doki Doki Literature Club is a ridiculously named game that released a short time ago to very little fanfare, to the point where I can barely find any mentions of it on big forums like Reddit's r/games. It's a shame, because this free visual novel that's over in about 5 hours
stock
is actually
Lightworks
really good,
effects there.
and that's coming from a person who has never gotten into the genre. There are certain aspects of its story structure that reminded me very strongly of Undertale, an indie game from a few years ago that I thought was brilliant, and that's what inspired me to make this video, comparing how the two of them tackle the same story beats to different effect.
Wow, that music is extremely loud. I remember for this first video, for some godforsaken reason, I had the music essentially baked into the VO. I synced all of the music with my VO in Audacity before importing it into my video editor, which was Lightworks at the time, which is terrible. Don't ever do that, because it restricts you from being able to rearrange stuff once you're actually starting to put the video together. I remember one of the first couple comments that I got was someone saying, like, dude, your music is way too freaking loud.
However, I cannot do so without spoiling each game from beginning to end, and both games are the type where the intended experience is to go in knowing as little as possible. So please, if you have even the slightest intention of playing either game, go do so before watching this video. It's only a small investment of time, and a little money in Undertale's case, and it keeps you from missing out on two very interesting games. For those who still don't feel like playing it, I'll do some brief recapping so we're all on the same page. This will be the last spoiler warning.
That line, "this is the last spoiler warning," is like a little too intense, but I do kind of like it. However, that entire opening section, I think, does show kind of one of the worst symptoms of my writing, that just the way that I sort of naturally write, and something that I'm still trying to keep under control to this day, in that this opening section is very formal. It's essentially presented like a school essay, because at the time that's the only real writing I had done. It's very, I am talking about this game, and I have noticed that it is similar to this game, and such I will compare, and contrast the two. It's I really strive in my more recent videos to be kind of more personable, but yeah, again, this is my first attempt at this sort of thing.
So the title I actually wanted for this video is...
I am still really happy with that, of changing from the default Undertale main menu music in the opening section, and then once we get past the spoiler warning, going into the main menu music from after you have all of the characters. And that's just like a fun little textural thing.
Undertale and Doki Doki Literature Club. How to hide your horror in plain sight. Yeah, this is a horror game. I'd be a real prick for putting a spoiler in the title though, so forgive the vague one you got. Hidden horror is what I've taken to calling games, shows, and so on with horror elements that hide it under their aesthetic or story structure, typically baiting the audience in before the big scare. Both Undertale and DDLC employ hidden horror as well as elements of surrealism and fourth wall breaking, but with very different intention and results.
Oh damn, this reminds me. I did go to pains to credit all of the people whose game footage I used in this video, because I did not feel like replaying any of these games to actually record the footage. I didn't even know how to really do footage recording properly, but I actually do need to go in and credit all of this fan art that I use. That was kind of shitty of me.
I should say going in that I'm not exactly unbiased about these two games. Undertale is a game I love, while Doki Doki Literature Club is a game whose relationship I have with it could best be described as intense appreciation. But
that's an interesting way of putting it. I'd say kind of one of the biggest things that is prompting this video that I'm working on right now, looking back on Doki Literature Club, is that I've realized I actually do like it a lot. It's now one of my favorite games. And probably the reason I struggled at the time to say that I liked it was that I hadn't really experienced anything that had made me feel that way before. Like, I could tell that I enjoyed the writing, that I enjoyed that it was like a, strongly crafted experience, but the fact that the sort of mix of emotions that gave me were so weird and sometimes unpleasant, I was like, is this really what it feels like to like something? I think it did point on a certain immaturity on my part at the time, that I wasn't able to reconcile those feelings.
This isn't meant to be a matchup. I'm not talking about which game's better or even which did hidden horror better. This is about how the two of them handle the same broad strokes of a central story idea in different ways, which I've separated into the following steps. The hype surrounding it, the initial hint that something is off, the big reveal, the surreal depths of madness after.
Man, that's a hell of a transition. The hype, the hints, the reveal, the depths of madness.
The reveal, and the abuse of the fourth wall. With that in mind, let's get started. Undertale's hype was difficult to avoid.
Its titles are really
boring. It already had a bit of a following before it came out, and it positively exploded on release. The fanbase could charitably be described as passionate, and this earned the game a...
Wow, those words on screen are not remotely synced up to the actual words that I speak. Look at this.
The fanbase could charitably be described as passionate, and this earned the...
Yeah, that's that's definitely something that would not have slid today, but what can you do?
The game a lot of unfair malign from people who hadn't even played it. Well, I think the Undertale community gets a bit of a bad rap. I can't help but think that for all the good they did getting the game out there, they did a fair bit of harm as well. Undertale is a game that hinges on its surprises, and having a large clout surrounding it increases the chance of an unwelcome spoiler. Not to mention that having people rave to you about how amazing the game is coming in can color your perceptions. My experience discovering Doki Doki Literature Club was quite different. This can partially be attributed to it coming out very recently, but I'd argue that a larger part of it is that it's a visual novel.
Ash, that's not my name. Yeah, once again, and you could see also the Undertale character was named Mario. Yeah, because I just looked for like the one DDLC gameplay upload that I could find on YouTube and just downloaded the whole thing. I do believe that it's credited in the description at least.
A genre with a much smaller and much quieter fan following. I found out about DDLC on 4chan's V, the same place I found out about Undertale.
Oh boy. Yeah, I definitely regret mentioning 4chan like at all in this video. Yeah, it is. I guess you could say it's kind of unavoidable if I wanted to tell the full story of how I found out about both of these games, but obviously it's not really a place that you want to associate yourself with. And yeah, I've definitely taken pains to never do that again. I don't go on V anymore. That place sucks.
Surprisingly, there were no spoilers in any of the OPs, except for that one guy who posted Monica did nothing wrong, but that's to be expected. When poking my head into one thread to see what all the fuss...
Oh, It's happened a couple of times before, but it was much more noticeable there. The incredibly obvious change to another recording session. There's a couple of clips where my voice just sounds so much different. It sounds a lot throatier. Usually retakes are just kind of part of the business, but it is strange. I never really could figure out why my voice sounded so much different on the sort of batch of retakes that I did all at once. That voice that this current section is in, you can hear several times throughout the video, if I remember.
This was about, I was surprised to see another newcomer who was immediately told to leave and even chastised for going into the thread when he hadn't finished the game yet.
I don't know about you guys, but this is not the V that I know.
I remember that was kind of surprising when someone went into the Doki Doki threads and was told to get the fuck out because there were a bunch of spoilers in there. Really uncommon, since that was a board very much known for just spoiling the hell out of anyone, but I think that's probably something people are more inclined to do if it's something popular, because you can just mess with the fans of something popular. But when it's so niche, I guess people just, want it to bring in as many people as possible.
That alone was enough to kick up the interest gauge another few notches. When looking at both games' Steam pages, you can see the beginnings of how their intentions diverge. The description for Undertale is mostly goofy, while the trailer is a mixture of fun, a little bit of hype for adventure, and some subtle hints at the darker aspects of the story. Doki Doki Literature Club, meanwhile, fully commits to its disguise. The trailer, screenshots, and descriptions are all about the cute girls and how much fun you're going to be having with them. Other than a single disclaimer, which I'll talk more about in the next section, and a single line that's a tad ominous, there's nothing immediately suspicious about this game. This is establishing what will become a recurring trend wherein Undertale is surprisingly forthcoming with its intentions. The game's certainly full of surprises, but at least in the first run, it doesn't outright lie to you about what kind of game it is. It's an adventure, it gets goofy, and there might be something scary lurking around. DDLC is happy to lie directly to your face, but that's okay. The game is much more focused on its deception, while Undertale has many other ideas.
This is something that I'm probably going to talk about pretty at length in the video, but I think I kind of pegged DDLC wrong in this video. Poor choice of words, but whatever. Talking about it essentially being all about the deception. I think what I've sort of discovered over time is that, yes, it does kind of try to wrong foot you in the opening act, but the fact that it has that disclaimer straight from the beginning, does kind of communicate that, yes, this is a game where something's weird is going on, and you should be sort of second guessing yourself. I think definitely one of the biggest mistakes in this entire video is that I say multiple times that, Doki Doki is just the scare and nothing else.
If this were a competition, I'd probably award this point to DDLC, if only because the community surrounding it has been surprisingly disciplined about keeping the game under wraps.
Not the case anymore.
It's a rare thing these days. Undertale establishes right away that something is up. There's a miniature version of the larger bait and switch in the first 2 minutes of gameplay, where Flowey, the malevolent talking flower, quickly drops his cute facade and tries to kill you. It doesn't take, but it's enough to put you on edge. The rest of the game is practically business as usual, with only the occasional reminder that something is indeed out there. The big reveal that's coming is a...
Now that I think about it, this has never occurred to me before, but that actually is something that makes Undertale and Doki Doki even more similar. The fact that it sort of drops something scary on you straight from the beginning and then backs off. And unless you find the hidden encounter with Flowey after you kill Toriel and then go back, if that doesn't happen, then you just kind of spend the entire first run of the game going like, is this game actually scary or not? And you could say that it kind of fills the same purpose as that disclaimer on Doki Doki. So, this would have been a very easy spot to compare them, but I don't think I really got that at the time.
Different variety of surprise. One where you know what's coming, but the nature of the surprise is still, well, a surprise. It's a curious way to go about this sort of thing, but it also sets up the game's tendency for abrupt tone shifts and more or less lays out all of the game's different moods in the first hour or so. It's also an effective way of manipulating the player's view of the world. It puts you in a position to instinctively mistrust Toriel, only for that to be slowly eroded over time as you build an attachment to her, which is a perfect setup for one of the game's greatest tricks in the hidden horror department. More on that later.
That's actually a really funny transition. I think I did that on purpose, where I say more on that later, right as Flowey gets like booted off of the screen. I don't remember exactly what they were so mad about, but somebody really hated this part here. I got like a really long comment once that really disputed the idea of the whole thing with Toriel being smart at all. I had a little bit of back and forth with him because I really actually enjoyed at the time when people would put like sort of well-reasoned rebuttals to what I was saying. They were essentially, if I remember right, arguing that Toriel wasn't really established enough as a character for her death to really be all that meaningful. And, you know, I disagreed because I thought it gave you reason enough to care about her in the beginning, and plus, sort of, whether the characters are shallow to you or not is sort of a meaningful theme in Undertale going forward. But it was a nice little exchange that I had with this person. I generally like it when people disagree with my videos, but, you know, say it in an interesting way. You know, if someone's just going to be in my comments and call me a jackass, then obviously not cool. But kind of one of the things I'd always wanted to do with videos in the very beginning was to promote discussions, even though that only really works when view counts are like below 100,000, but whatever.
Doki Doki Literature Club's approach is a bit weird. The game's entire first act, where things are happy and normal, is almost completely devoid of any sort of dark foreshadowing, or at least any that I could pick up on.
That is so fucking wrong. Oh my god. I'm not going to really talk about this because this is going to be a subject in the video, but if you play this game a second time, there is a lot of foreshadowing. Probably some that you could pick up on your first run around, but no, I just missed it.
There are a few lines that seem like in-jokes that in hindsight are actually hints of some of the wilder ideas coming later on.
Towards the end of the first act, you start getting inklings that something is about to go wrong.
But for the first several in-game days, it plays like any other visual novel. If nothing else, it's pretty unified with the game's apparent philosophy of lying to the player's face. Or at least that's what I would say, if it weren't for the disclaimer I mentioned earlier.
It's at the very top of the game's Steam description, and it's the very first screen that you see when you start the game. This game is not suitable for children or for those who are easily disturbed.
It's literally your first exposure to the game. After that, it cuts to the title screen with the upbeat music and cute anime girls, and all I could think is, man, who are you trying to fool?
This is something that I'm actually really excited about, because I've actually finally heard some creative intent on that whole part. I'm not going to say in full, because once again, this is something I'm saving for the video, but according to Dan Salvato, that effect that I just described of seeing the disclaimer and then going to the title screen and going like, man, who you're trying to fool, that was exactly his intention.
Even though I just said that there was nothing strange early on, I nonetheless spent the first few hours playing Spot the Foreshadowing. Despite the cute aesthetic, I was more tense playing that game than basically anything else in recent memory. And you know what? That's a pretty good thing for a horror game to achieve. There's nothing scarier than your imagination running wild.
My earlier guesses for what would go wrong ranged from the club being full of vampires or succubi, turning the relationship mechanic typical of visual novels on its head.
Wow. Look at this pro use of titles here, just using like the carrots to push up. Succubi was such a strange thing to say. Why did I say that? I do remember having this image in my head when I was first playing this game of like you pursuing a route with one of these girls, and then you would get to some kind of romantic scene, and then there'd be some narration about your character being pushed to the ground, and then there would be a CG of like, you know, Yuri with glowing red eyes and, you know, blood dripping out of her mouth. Succubi though, what the hell was I thinking?
To one of the girls murdering whoever I got close to. The only
I mean, that's not wrong.
Question this leaves me with is whether this is the experience the developers intended.
My impression was that this game intended to be a true bait and switch, luring you in with high school romantic adventures before going for the jugular. In that case, it seemed baffling that they'd give away the charade so openly. I appreciate trying to protect people who might not want to see this kind of thing, but it undermines it for those who do. On the other hand, if it was the intended experience, then it's actually brilliant. The opening act was just long enough that I was beginning to think that I was being double baited and that I was actually playing a completely normal visual novel that everyone was pretending was going to turn scary. That ended up, in turn, lowering my guard right before the big gotcha came in. This almost certainly wasn't the intention, but if it were, then this game would be a level of meta-horror.
This was such a weird joke. I still don't know what this book is. Maybe it means something better. This looks like it's a German, maybe. The title makes sense in German. I think I just Googled the word meta horror, and I happened to find this book title. This doesn't work as a joke because nobody knows what this book is, but I don't know. I just decided to throw this in there. I guess you could say even back then I really loved the incredibly low effort gag of having something fly in from the side of the screen and then quickly fly off to the other side.
That I've never seen anywhere else. Between DDLC and Undertale, there's once again a contrast between a game that's about one thing and a game that's about many things. One isn't necessarily superior to the other, but they require different approaches. DDLC is all about the horror, and
yeah, once again, well, first, like I said, saying that DDLC is about one thing I think is pretty blatantly wrong, and especially when you look at the character stories. But also, I think this is the part where this script is really repeating itself. I kind of hammer in this point way more than it should be.
Everything that's in it is built around it, necessitating some deception and wrong footing. Undertale has more on its plate, so it establishes the existence of its horror early on, but nonetheless takes it to unexpected places. It's a bit of a debatable topic as to whether it's a good move to advertise your intentions this early in. Personally, I think that as a general rule, it's a good idea for a narrative work's opening act to be something of a microcosm of what it intends to be. This doesn't mean you can't be surprising later on, it just means that the surprises have to be a little more creative. If the genre flip from cute to horror is the main thrust of the game...
If I remember right, a lot of the assets that I used for this video were just random reaction pictures that I picked up in V's Doki Doki threads. And this does make the delivery of this line of, cute to horror, it kind of robs it of any weight by having this goofy ass image on the screen. But I have to admit that I still kind of like it.
Then, well, you'd better make damn sure that you do it right, because structuring a story like that means that if it fails, there isn't much else to go on. Fortunately, that's DDLC's strongest aspect. This is the culmination of hidden horror. The reveal can make or break the entire experience. Both games have it, but with very different intentions. Doki Doki Literature Club opts to focus on making the player specifically feel like shit. Regardless of your choices.
Specifically? I said focuses on making the player specifically feel like shit. That the inclusion of the word specifically there doesn't make any sense. Who else? Who else would be made to feel like shit in this single player video game? I don't know. One of those word choices that normally another revision should catch.
You're funneled down a route that forces you to make a decision where, no matter what, someone is getting heartbroken. And man oh man, do they get heartbroken. I later found out, to some dismay, that the ultimate result is exactly the same regardless of your choices. But as a fan of Mass Effect, I'm not exactly one to throw stones in this department, and if the writing is convincing on your first...
that Mass Effect line is actually pretty funny. I do like that. I think I did this a couple more times in some of my other videos of just subtly roasting myself for being a Mass Effect fan, because honestly, I deserve it. I guess if you're not familiar with this video, I think a content warning for suicide imagery coming up.
Time through, I can let it slide. The big moment comes when this cute little ball of energy with crippling depression confesses her love to you, and even if you accept her, she realizes that that still doesn't make her happy, followed by... Oh my. Yeah, it ends with a very sudden and graphic suicide, and you really feel like it's entirely your fault. The game baits you as hard as it can to load a save and maybe try to prevent this. Do so, and it will tell you that her character data is corrupted, and the game restarts, -1 girl,
Yeah, definitely agree with my old self of just scrubbing it off of the screen after having made my point. I vaguely remember when I was making this video, that moment in the first draft of the script was a little bit different. Originally, it was supposed to be kind of a mic cut joke, where the lead up is basically the same, but rather than the oh my, I keep talking and then I just go, oh god, what the heck, and then cut off there. I ended up not doing that for a couple of reasons. I think the primary reason I didn't do it is because I just basically couldn't get the delivery of it to be funny enough. You might have noticed, but I'm not really good at yelling on mic. But in retrospect, what should have been the reason is that really would have ruined the gravity of the moment. Like, even though the line that was there was still kind of a joke, it's more of just kind of a dark humor joke as opposed to the sort of slapstick that the original line would have been. And if I recall, I got a comment not long after this video came out of someone essentially saying, thank you so much for not having jump scares in this video. And I feel like they probably wouldn't have been so kind if I had included that old version.
And plus one set of horrifying glitches. It works pretty well with the slowly declining pressure of the preceding hours, and doubly so with some really convincing character writing that really ratchets up the guilt. Personally, I let Sayori die because I was hoping for a shot with Yuri. I'm a bad person.
That line still does kind of make me laugh.
Undertale's version of this scene, meanwhile, is one
Again, God, this music is so loud.
of my favorite gaming moments of all time. Truthfully, it has two of these. The second is a bit more standard, but what I find more relevant is the fact that there's an optional holy shit scene that takes place just an hour or two into the game. Through some clever design, you're put into a situation where you're very likely to accidentally kill a very endearing and friendly character. Like DDLC, the game baits you pretty hard to reload a save and maybe try to prevent it. If you do, then surprise, it actually works. It gets a little surreal, but you get a heartwarming little scene for your trouble. But then that bastard Flowey shows up and he's got some choice words for you.
I know what you did.
You murdered her, and then you went back because you regretted it.
Yeah, that's actually my voice there. Just kind of messing around with some basic effects in Audacity. Even though it doesn't necessarily make sense to include this in the video, I guess it does kind of make sense to be put here just for effect to emphasize the moment. This messing around with voice filters to kind of sound like Flowey was something that I had been doing for quite a while before I ever made this video. I didn't publish it anywhere, I just kind of did it for fun because there were some videos out there of people voicing Flowey and changing their voices whenever he switched to a different face, and I always thought that was really cool. For the record, Crash Boom Banger is the authoritative Flowey voice, and I don't care what anybody else says.
The pure brilliance of this scene is that it's entirely optional.
As much as I argue with my sort of overuse of music in this video, I think this Undertale music here is actually really well placed. I still kind of go back and forth on whether to use music in my videos. But I think when well used, it can really accentuate the moment. And I think this is one of the better ones.
You're very strongly pushed towards it, but you're never forced into it. You have to make a conscious decision to try to change fate, and your reward is this truly chilling scene. Not just because it's taking saving, a feature that's made gamers feel safe for decades, and ripping it away from you, but because it gives you this feeling that you're finding something that you weren't meant to see. You've looked too far, and you got burned for it. Would DDLC have been better with this sort of reveal? Perhaps. Even though the build-up to the suicide is impeccably executed.
So I only kind of allude to it here. This is something that I talk about a little bit more explicitly in my second Deltarune video, where I mentioned that my whole concept of hidden horror was taken from this Cracked article, where it kind of speculates this idea of a horror game that can be played from start to finish, essentially without any horror at all. And Undertale is like that to an extent. I mean, until you get to the final boss of the neutral route. But that was what left me so utterly enchanted with this optional scene with Flowey, because I thought that, kind of like the Cracked article said, it would be kind of impossible to really have a game that, would be normally playable but had horror if you kind of looked a little too far. Yeah, it's still just like some really brilliant execution.
Everything after it feels a little less inspired. Maybe it's because I've seen fourth wall screwiness in games like this before, but this is a talk about hidden horror
That was some really weird delivery.
in games like this before.
Bavar. I won't comment on the delivery too much, I guess, because, again, this is my first time doing something like this.
But this is a talk about hidden horror, and nothing quite exemplifies that idea more than a moment that truly gives you that you're not supposed to be here feeling. After a moment like this, there are basically two options. Shove the player back into the regular game and let this simmer uncomfortably in the back of their minds, or use the reveal as a jumping off point to go really crazy.
I've luckily never seen people really comment on this, but there are long stretches of this video that are like barely edited. Like that whole part at the end there was just a black screen, about 10 seconds of black screen. And I know that there are sections of this that are just one clip, for a very long period of time. Generally, at a minimum, I try to have, even back then, I would try to put one clip per sentence. But sometimes I would break that rule. I'm probably not going to talk about this in my retrospective, but when I was making my original DDLC video, I was essentially making the video because I was originally going to make it a text post on Reddit, but then I thought nobody would read it because it was so long. And I was hoping that I would at least get some traction with it because it was a relatively unknown game. But as I was working on it, the YouTuber Mother's Basement did a stream of the game. And so he was one of the first big YouTubers I knew of that was interacting with this game at all. And I became convinced that now that he had played it, he was going to make a video about it. And I thought that would just completely overshadow my video and I would have no chance of success. So I really rushed getting this video finished because I wanted to get it out before his. And he never made a video. He did make a video about it maybe a year later on kind of a different topic. So I did kind of rush for nothing, and that's why I think the editing in some parts of this video kind of suffer. It was just a weird sort of paranoia. I don't know why I cared so much.
By depths of madness, I mean the sequence immediately after the big hidden horror reveal. Both games opt to crank up the surrealism to the extreme, favoring visual glitches, breaking art style, and horrifying imagery. It could be said that this is the part that gives weight to the big twist. It wasn't just a one-off thing. This is the new reality, or at least the game wants you to think that. Now that Doki Doki Literature Club has fully committed to its identity as a horror game, it makes the most of it, so the depths of madness lasts for about half the game's runtime. The theme of this sequence is the entire world unraveling. The game starts again from the beginning, but the girl who killed herself earlier is now completely absent.
This is another part of the game that I think looks very different when you play it more than once. Because I said earlier that the theme of Act 2 is the world unraveling. And since I've replayed the game, I'm not sure I would really say that anymore. Because, yes, that is a thing. First, the kind of fourth wall breaking stuff that it does during this section maybe seems a lot less extreme since I've played One Shot, but I think when you replay this game and you focus on the characters a lot more, essentially once you know what Monica is up to, you can essentially view it as Act 1 is Monica trying to subtly prod you towards her, and then Act 2 is her really strongly trying to pull you towards her. And I think one of the parts that makes Act 2 just so sad is that, while Sayori didn't seem to understand, what had happened to her, Yuri did seem kind of aware, and she seems to be fighting against essentially this insanity foisted onto her.
With the occasional jumbled textures and gibberish text in her place. Other characters regularly glitch out too. Psychotic behavior, eyes popping out and in, and a few lines replaced with altered text saying sickening things.
I can't say it doesn't do what it sets out to do.
The only thing is that while it goes on for a while, there's nothing that explicitly makes me feel like it has to be this long.
It takes about as long as the first segment, long enough to get through the same set of days. You could say that it's the pace the game has set for itself, but by the end it felt more like a necessity. We're going this long because that's how long it's supposed to be, rather than that's how long it has to be. The horror doesn't get stale, but I can't say it didn't give me a feeling of, come on, let's get a move on by the end.
I'm not sure if I still stand by that or not. I think Act 2 definitely goes a lot faster on a second run around. It's definitely shorter. I think it's 3 days, while Act 1 is 5 days. That is kind of a strange thing. I think the escalation of the horror does kind of keep it from getting too stale.
Undertale arguably has 2 of these sequences, but I'll be discussing the first one, which is encountered at the end of the neutral route. It's comparatively short, only lasting over the course of a boss fight, but it leaves a serious impression. Flowey the Asshole Flower ascends to Elder God status and begins rewriting the fundamental nature of the universe. This is actually a bit of a reversal in this comparison, because while DDLC has many different ideas for horrific imagery, Undertale mainly sets on one, which is the complete shattering of its art style.
Cute pixel art that was...
God, this spooked me so freaking hard when I first played it. I think I mentioned it in this video that like my jaw actually like physically dropped, but got kind of on a smaller scale to DDL. The way that DDLC left me so aggravated, not aggravated, agitated, I think, for several days after I played it. Like, this had me like almost physically shaking for the rest of the evening after I played this. I think it's just an incredibly well executed reveal.
Either monochromatic or composed of simple colors, gives way to photorealistic textures as Flowey the punk-ass flower assumes a new form that appears to be made of human flesh but is definitely not human-shaped.
This is the only moment in any game ever that's made my jaw drop, purely from the perfect timing and execution of the reveal. The rest of the fight doesn't really have any new ideas in the way of horror imagery, other than the fact that you have to keep on looking at that thing, but it expands its horror into the narrative. The fight is completely hopeless. You're a puny child struggling against a creature that freely controls time and space. The fourth wall starts to break down too, with the game crashing every time you die. The major difference between these two is in how the sequence ends. If you're in this purely for horror, then depending on your taste, Undertale might not be what you're looking for, because you actually win in the end. There's a heroic comeback sequence that gets hilariously cut short, followed by an actual comeback where you ultimately defeat Flowey the tragically misunderstood flower. From a
I do kind of still like that running gag of like calling Flowey something slightly different after he comes up. I kind of reproduce it in the video about One Shot, but I don't think it's quite as funny.
plot and character progression standpoint, it's great. From a horror standpoint, well, you just faced down a Lovecraftian abomination and won. Exhausted and horrified as you may be, some part of you realizes that you're more or less unstoppable at this point. Empowerment is pretty antithetical to horror. Now, Undertale actually does find ways to work in horror despite the player character's power, or rather because of it later on, but for this stage of the story, it decisively brings that aspect of the game to a close.
A couple comments here. First off, I really like the visual, like the visual of that fan art, as well as the sort of trailing off drums in the background. I think that kind of syncs up and looks pretty good. This did prompt like a fair amount of comments, essentially saying like, why the hell did you not talk about the genocide route? And I didn't, basically because it didn't fit into the sort of the core comparison that I was trying to make. You know, I tried to make this comparison very linear, which was probably a mistake in the first place, but, you know, hey, what can you do? But I think definitely the limitation of not talking about the genocide route is it does kind of refute my point there of this being kind of the end of horror in this game. Because I think the genocide route is actually incredibly inventive in regards to how it makes use of horror. I mean, I kind of allude to it there, that it's really because of your power rather than, you know, in spite of it. But yeah, I think just for the anytime you're making a video like this, you're going to have to cut some stuff for time or just for the general flow of the script. And I think that's understandable, but it does sort of undermine my own point here.
DDLC is having none of that. The Depths of Madness sequence ends with another suicide, this one even more horrifying and graphic than the first, followed by the final obliteration of the fourth wall. Despite the breakdown of reality, you can't help but feel once again that it's your fault. I'll admit that this sort of rock-bottom despair isn't really what I seek out in entertainment.
Nonetheless, it displays a real commitment to its themes and doesn't back down.
This is why I said earlier that I appreciate DDLC rather than love it. It's the kind of thing
that's what I was talking about earlier. I think I really didn't know how to handle this at the time. I think the whole thing about rock bottom despair was partially drawing on my feelings on the anime Madoka Magica, because that was something that I also kind of had similar feelings on, where like I appreciated the artistry but just didn't like how it made me feel. Which does kind of make me think that I have not rewatched Madoka Magica since. And this sort of makes me think that I do need to rewatch it, because I would probably like it a lot more now than I did then. Because I have finally accepted media is allowed to make me sad.
keeps you awake at night, unable to keep the image of Yuri's deranged expression right before she stabs herself out of your head.
That was some decent editing there, cutting off right at the end, because frankly, having more suicide imagery in the video would not be kosher. I'm surprised that this video has not been demonetized, honestly. I have kind of this suspicion that when something has been on YouTube long enough, YouTube just kind of lets it be. But on the other hand, I don't really understand the whole demonetization meta. I've only ever had one video copyright claimed, and that was my top 10 video, because I very blatantly used some JoJo music in the beginning, like without any speaking on top of it. There's a part of me that kind of wonders how much of the sort of anti-demonetization meta right now is just paranoia, but I guess I'll find out when I make this next video. I'm actually planning on experimenting with this next video I'm making of just saying suicide when suicide is the topic, but I'm going to do a little test upload, just a test private upload, and if it gets demonetized, I am going to dub over it with like a really heavily compressed voice of me saying, demonetized is like, after Sayori demonetizes herself. Because I want that money.
Undertale's fourth wall breaking is often misunderstood. Many of its most pivotal moments seem like fourth wall breaks, manipulating saves, breaking the rules of combat, acknowledging mechanics like text boxes, and so on.
The thing is, one of the underappreciated strokes of genius in Undertale is that every supposed fourth wall break is actually just a reveal that something we thought was a game mechanic was actually a real thing within the world of the story.
Saving, for example, is actually an extremely potent temporal superpower that passes from person to person. When Flowey says everything is just a game, it's a reference to how the whole story is really just about Azrael and Kara, as if the two of them were kids playing make-believe. I, personally, like this a lot more than standard fourth wall break.
In retrospect, I do kind of question whether this entire section of the script is necessary. I guess it's a kind of a decent, sort of denouement after talking about the depths of madness, but the whole thing about breaking the fourth wall doesn't necessarily have that much to do with horror. I guess, it is kind of about how the fourth wall breaking is utilized in horror. I definitely talk, if I remember right, I talk about this more in regards to DDLC, but I think I just wanted to gush about Undertale more.
For one, it's no longer sharing space with other stories that merely use it for comedy. Not that these uses are bad, it just makes it a little harder to take it seriously in this context. Secondly, I think this type of fourth wall leaning, for lack of a better term, is actually better suited to hidden horror. Doki Doki Literature Club opts for the maximum fourth wall break, where one of the characters is revealed to be self-aware and manipulating the game from within. It's a decent conclusion to the story, but it doesn't stop that little voice in the back of my head from telling me that some writer scripted her to say, "I know that I live inside a game." For all the tricks that it pulls, and I'll admit that calling me by my real name certainly caught my attention, the sequence straddles the line between feeling...
I don't think that was intentional, but the music, like the piano coming in on the background music right over that last line as I talk about calling by my real name, kind of makes for a good moment. It really punctuates it nicely. Here, let's just listen to that again.
Inside a game. For all the tricks that it pulls, and I'll admit that calling me by my real name certainly caught my attention.
Yeah, I don't think I did that on purpose, because I was just kind of slapping this music in here, but unintentionally, I think that worked pretty well.
The sequence straddles the line between feeling real and being a regular game that got too big for its britches.
What a weird fucking line there. Too big for its britches. I just slipped this random southernism in there. I can probably admit this without somebody, breaking down my door, but I do live in the US South. I don't use a lot of southernisms, but I guess that's the one that got away. I think a lot of what I've said in this section, I ended up addressing with my one-shot video. Suffice it to say, I think my thoughts on breaking the fourth wall as a storytelling mechanic have changed pretty substantially since then.
Undertale avoids this problem by keeping everything inside the game. When you learn that the save system is an actual story element, it keeps you immersed and makes you less likely to think, hey, maybe this jerk flower was just scripted to say this if an invisible trigger detects a reload. A lot of people think that fourth wall shenanigans are in general pretty lowbrow. I can understand that viewpoint, but I think Undertale represents a decent compromise.
It keeps the essential elements of shock and comedy while keeping things mostly grounded within the context of the story.
Undertale's focus is one of many things that makes it good, but being focused doesn't mean it's solely about one thing. The hidden horror part of its structure is merely a part of it used to prop up the central story. Doki Doki Literature Club is really about one thing, and that's fine.
Yeah, once again, I'm really repeating myself. I think there's kind of the germ of a good point here. Essentially the idea that, fourth wall breaking or the sort of hidden horror reveal needs to be done in the service of a good story. I would say I broadly still agree with that. However, I essentially imply that Doki Doki doesn't do that. I still think that it does. I think there's still, a decent amount of substance to its actual characters. But I think it is still a respectable principle. And I would say that this idea ended up maturing into some of the stuff that I talk about in the fourth wall breaking video, that essentially, stuff like that needs to serve a good story.
Love it or hate it, it's hard to deny that it's fully committed to what it is, and it did a good job in the meantime. This does have the downside, however, that if this aspect of the presentation falls flat for someone, there really isn't much else to go on. I've heard some people say that the reason DDLC hasn't been getting much discussion, besides its niche appeal, is that there really isn't much discussion to be had. Unless you're one of those people who completely misses the point and picks a waifu from one of these psychologically damaged cardboard cutouts, what really is there besides...
That little flash there at the bottom saying Yuri is mine, if you couldn't tell, about the whole waifu thing. That whole comment about there isn't much discussion about DDLC because there's not much to talk about, that was, I think, also something that I saw in the threads on V. And, that's a very funny comment in retrospect, because obviously the game ended up being huge. And I hate to repeat myself, but this is once again something that I want to talk about a little bit more in the video, because I think it's evidence that there's more to this game that resonated with people than just, the horror twist, even though that's a big part of it. The video that Mother's Basement ended up doing about this game, I think it did get into it in a pretty interesting way, because he essentially talked about the fan-made happy endings. How people will do this, fan art and stuff of the characters just sort of living their lives. And basically that there's more to it than just waifuism. That it does essentially sort of get across that people saw something in these characters. And people kind of put down stuff like this or fan fiction It's just about these characters living their lives. But I think sometimes this is something that people just want. Something that Dan Salvato has said in his AMA since then is that the ending of the game is kind of deliberately unsatisfying. I would say that more of the base ending of the game than the secret ending. I think there's a little more catharsis in the secret ending. But for the base ending, yeah, it kind of ends like, man, everything just like ended up getting burned to the ground. But I think when these, characters end up, when people end up connecting with them, people will show that sort of dedication. And I think what's so interesting about that is it kind of flies in the face of what Monica tried to do. Because she talks a little bit in Act 3, if you just sit around and chat with Monica for a while. She's like, how the hell could anybody ever love someone like Sayori, Yuri, or Natsuki? Natsuki? I never know how to pronounce it. God, before I record the VO for this next video, I'm going to have to settle on a definitive pronunciation. But she's basically like, how could anybody love these girls? They're not real. They're just like a loose collection of character tropes, presented like as a buffet for the player. But I think what kind of ends up making the difference is that, I hate to reference my one-shot video again, but y'all people didn't fucking watch it, was that, characters take on their own life once the audience experiences them. They become this sort of, semi-real entity, if I want to be a little bit pretentious about it. And this is even further pushed by the fact that, Yuri, Natsuki, and Sayori actually have some pretty significant nuance despite their tropes. And kind of a big part of what makes Act 1 so appealing is those tropes kind of fall away as you see that they're much more fully realized characters below the surface.
Besides the twist, right? Well, I wouldn't be so sure.
The reason I even made this video in the first place was because I couldn't stop thinking about it for several days after playing, and even right now, the surprisingly heartfelt credit song is looping over and over in my head. Even though Monica makes a distinct effort to dehumanize the other characters, and I make mean jokes about them being cardboard cutouts, you see just enough of their struggles to be happy that watching it all fall apart really gets to you.
It's the smiles that you couldn't protect that stick with you the most,
I think at this part of the video, I'm kind of at the precipice of having these thoughts that I basically just explained to you. I'm not sure if, having this video sit in the oven for another couple of weeks would have led to me getting to those thoughts. I think I just needed to write and think more about storytelling to really understand this sort of stuff. But I think that's what's kind of interesting about going back to this video is that you can see sort of the larval form of a lot of later ideas that, just kind of took more maturity to really come out.
And that's not even getting into that this game gets dangerously close to having themes at the end.
How close are we to the end of the video? We're 20 minutes into this 21-minute video, and I'm like, oh yeah, DDLC has themes. Yeah, I know I spent this entire video saying it's only about one thing, but it also has themes. Yeah, whatever.
Monica's song reflects on how her obsession with the player has only caused suffering for everyone involved. It may seem like a strange thing to say about a game so gruesome, but DDLC was definitely made with a lot of love. I guess that's another thing it has in common with Undertale.
That was kind of a nice trail off there.
If you got to the end of this video, then thank you.
This is my first attempt at this sort of thing, so hopefully at least one person found this interesting or entertaining. I didn't really make this video with the intention of it being the next big thing, but rather because I felt like I was going to explode if I didn't. But if enough people like it, then who knows? Maybe this won't be the last time we see each other.
That was another kind of nice little emotional beat, is like saying this won't be the last time we see each other, right as the second instrument cuts in on that. It was a strange choice to make this entire section blurry. I think I envisioned there being an end card here, but I didn't realize that you can only make end cards so long, so I'm just talking over weirdly blurry footage for this.
I'd love to hear what you think of DDLC, or how its use of hidden horror compares to Undertale or other similar games. Alternatively, give me some feedback on how this video turned out. I worked really hard on it, but obviously I'm still an amateur, so I'd like to hear how I could improve if I ever do this again. Unless your feedback is about my quality. I already know. I've been Rycluse, thanks for watching.
And there I was, preempting all of the haters who were going to talk about my mic quality. And so that is my first video. It's alright. It's kind of hard to rate it, like, semi-impartially. I think it gets into some interesting ideas, but I think this is like a 5 out of 10 at best. This video, though, was still like a really incredible experience to put together. This was one of very few times in my life that I would call myself inspired. And what I mean by that is like having an idea that completely takes hold of me and that I cannot do anything else until it has been created. Yeah, I didn't really like consider myself that much of a creative. I had done a little bit of writing previously and not really shown it to anybody other than family. But man, this game just gave me a bug. So that's the end of the reaction video. I didn't die on recording as much as I thought I did. You know, I'm glad that I didn't die of cringe with all of you having to just listen to my death gurgles over my microphone. So sorry to rob you of that entertainment. But hopefully this was some nice insight. Stick around, do the fucking bell shit or whatever. I don't care if you want to see more of my shit posts. And I'm doing Pokemon Smash or Pass next.